everyone to the BEP Review Committee to discuss and approve the annual BEP Review Report. Nathan will call the roll of the members or their designees to establish a quorum. Nathan, I turn it over to you.
Michelle Simpkins.
Here.
Representative Mark White. Chairman White.
Here.
David Connor.
Here.
Senator Kelsey or Michael Marion.
Michael Marion here for Senator Brian Kelsey.
Ben Torres.
Here.
Eddie Pruitt.
Here.
Chris Henson.
Here.
Sarah Morrison.
Here.
Rita Hammock. Rita. Penny Schwinn.
Mary Ann Dursky for Penny Schwinn.
Let's see, Commissioner Schwinn. Commissioner Ely.
Greg Turner for Commissioner Ely.
Cliff Lippard.
Here.
Marla Davis.
Here.
Bob Eby.
Here.
Nikki Hall. Comptroller Mumpower.
Linda Wesson for Comptroller Mumpower.
Robin Fairclough.
Here.
Dale Lynch.
Here.
Mayor McDonald.
Here.
And although her appointment doesn't come until officially this Friday morning, Jessica Himes for the House Budget Office.
Here.
Okay. And Kurt Drumbarger.
Here.
And Madam Chair.
Here.
It looks like you're just missing 2 members. You definitely have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, we have a quorum and we are duly convened. Nathan, you will now read the statement of necessity to conduct this meeting virtually.
Thank you. All right. So this is a letter to the Office of the Secretary of State pursuant to TCA Section 844-108B3, the Tennessee Basic Education Program Review Committee by and through the State Board of Education submits this letter as its determination of necessity for its committee meeting being held via teleconference at 9 a.m. Central Daylight Time, October the 26th, 2021. This committee is charged with the creation of a BEP report, which has a statutory deadline of November the 1st every year. Because of the time-sensitive nature of the issue, because members of the BEP Review Committee reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not be assembled in Nashville for the purposes of this meeting. As such, the BEP Review Committee met via teleconference to review, edit, and finalize this time-sensitive report. This statement of necessity for the teleconference was made during the meeting by myself. List of members present and signed. With that, Madam Chair, we are legal.
Well, thank you very much for that, Nathan. Without objection, the recording of our last meeting will serve as the minutes. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. I do want to take a moment to officially welcome Jessica Himes to our meeting. And also I do want to mention Greg Turner is here with us, but Greg, I'm going to ask you to just make a comment or two. It's my understanding that this will be your last meeting with us. And if you don't mind sharing with us what your plans are, where you will be going from here. Is that okay?
Yes, I will be going to TennCare. I will be going over there and filling the position of Deputy CFO at TennCare, and that will be starting November 1st. And so I just want to thank everyone. This almost 10 years to the day when I first started on the committee and started in my role in the budget office as an education coordinator. So I just want to thank everyone. I know there's particularly the staff, Nathan and Marianne, both specifically for this committee, but just in general for all the work we've done in the budget office. They're both been extremely helpful over the years, and you know, I couldn't have done my job without them and the assistance that they've given me. So I just want to thank them personally for all their help. And to the committee, I know the work you do here is very important, and you know, and as we move forward in the state, I know that you know, people will continue to look to this committee for guidance and for, you know, leadership on VEP and just education funding in general. So thank you all.
Greg, thank you for saying that, but we definitely will miss you. We know you are not the official member of this committee, but you certainly have been with us along the way, and your contributions are absolutely invaluable. So thank you so much for your service, and we wish you all the best on the next phase of your journey. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Moving into the main purpose for this meeting is the review of the annual report. Erica Light on our staff, as well as Nathan James, will take us through the report so we can hear your feedback and your comments. And as Nathan mentioned earlier, as we were convening, we'll have the opportunity to make changes live as we go through this discussion, and then have one vote with one motion after hearing all of the edits and recommendations that we all agree upon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan and Erica.
Erica, if you'll go ahead and bring it up, and just got to take a moment here. Yeah, I understand careers change, and Greg's got a great future ahead of him. But what I don't think members maybe understand is that there's not just a million people who get all this stuff the way he does. Yeah, you know, there's a small handful, and yeah, I can't begin to tell you. I mean, not only just with his committee, but just in my role as a finance officer for the State Board of Education, the times I've been able to call him and get a straightforward answer, and somebody who's always going to cut through and give it to me straight. I just I really it's just a hard thing to see him go from a purely selfish point of view. But God bless you on the next step, my friend. So with that, I'd like Erica, if you want to just take us through piece by piece. And I know some of the members have identified areas that they want to make some edits, or perhaps have sought some clarification. I've only gotten 2 or 3 emails in advance, or a couple of phone call conversations where there exists some ambiguity. So I certainly, I think just a quick piece by piece overview, and then let's recognize members for their edits on it, being that this has been in their hands at least over the weekend, and I know there's things also that Mary Ann will be able to help us with. There's nobody like Mary Ann either. That's in terms of the institutional knowledge and just an extremely keen mind. So none of this comes together without Erica, and none of it comes together without Mary Ann. So
thank you, Nathan. So I'm going to scroll down from the title page for a moment, and then once we're on a page that has some more text, would you like me to make the text larger?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody else is okay with where it is, but
Yes,
probably
please.
a little bigger would be great.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So the table of contents is just automatically generated, so that's not very interesting. In terms of BEP committee members, we already had 1 member submit a correction to their title. Otherwise, I don't anticipate having edits to this page, but let me know if you have any corrections that you need to submit to your name or your title.
Hey, Erica.
Yes,
There, it looks like we go back up to page 4 right there.
yes.
Under Mickey Hall, he's no longer at Wilson County Schools. It would be Michael Smith. I'm his replacement.
Okay,
Sorry, I just
Yeah,
caught
I
that.
think- Did we
Let's-
list the, I'll tell you what we can do. We've got your name on the latest sheet. That's also gonna have Jessica's name on it, and that will be adopted by the board, by action of the board this Friday morning. So I'll tell you what we've done in the past to reflect changes that have happened through the year is we just put both of them in there. So what I would suggest is we simply include the list that will be on our board agenda this Friday in addition to that one, so that it reflects the entire year.
okay, yes.
if-
On page 4, this is actually, page 4 is last year's committee members. So I believe that it's correct to have Mickey Hall on the list for last year's committee members. For this year's committee members, which is on page 5, we will make that update based on the list that is going to be approved this Friday. Okay, moving on to the work of the committee. This page is essentially the same from year to year. It just spells out the legal requirements for this committee and this report. We have at the bottom of the page is an actual extended quote from the Tennessee Code annotated about this committee. The guiding principle statement is something that this committee has voted on in the past to amend. So if anyone has any amendments to propose today, we will entertain those in a few minutes. Moving on to the 2021 executive summary. This page just has a list of what our priorities were last year, the new priorities this year, and a list of notable action items of this committee. All of these are described in further detail farther below. Update on the 2020 BEP committee recommendations. The priorities here are copied verbatim from last year's report. At the bottom of the page, we have put in an update with information about the 2021-22 budget and items related to the BEP committee's priorities that were passed in the 2021-22 budget.
Which are fairly considerable, by the way.
Yes, there are several items on this list, and many of them are very large in dollar value. For the next section, we have the 2021 BEP committee recommendations. These are the items that you all voted to approve as your priority list. The wording in this section is very similar to the BEP priority letter, which I know that you all have already seen. So there should be no new information really in this section. It's just information about each priority. And for the specific priorities related to changing the ratio of nurses, counselors, and RTI positions, we do have an estimate of the increase in state expenditures that would be required for each of those. So we have, of course, our #1 priority this year that this committee voted on was to fund the number of school nurses at a level closer to national best practices. #2 was funding the number of school counselors at a level closer to national best practices. #3, increased funding for response to intervention and instruction, RTI squared. #4, continued commitment to teacher compensation. And here we have noted that increases to the BEP instructional component would translate to larger increases in pay for teachers if the earlier priorities regarding nurses and counselors were also funded.
And that reflects language that, from the discussion that we had when when we put together the priority letter to kind of put a little more meat on each of those bones. There's also a question about the ratios for RTI, and that also reflected the conversation that we had. It was a little easier with some of the other pieces where you have kind of, national organizations and their published best practices, whereas with RTI, going from 1 to 2,750 down to an average of 1 to 1,000 was the place that the committee came to when we were putting together the priority letter.
Nathan, this is Sarah. Just comment on that because I know I'd flagged that. I think that's exactly right. I just wonder if we want to add a sentence in there just explaining just a tad further in terms of, this would get us further towards a ratio that will best support this kind of programming, or this is sort of in response to feedback from the field, but something that gives a little bit more of an idea to the audience for this report, just to your point that there's not necessarily a national best practice in this area, but this is moving us in the right direction, because it felt to me like it still kind of is coming out of nowhere when you read the report in terms of how we got that number 1 to 1,000.
If you want to, I'll tell you what, you want to propose some language, we can make the edits in real time.
Okay, let me work on a quick sentence, but yes, something to that
Michael
effect.
Smith is with us as well.
Nathan, did you notice that David Connor has a couple of recommendations relative to?
Yeah, I just saw that. Yeah, and it's fine. I would say go ahead and speak up.
Right. Yeah, on item 4, it's a suggestion, the second paragraph, when it's talking about as many districts employ more counselors, nurses, and interventionists, could we add in and employ more teachers than the number funded through the BEP?
I believe the reason that it was specifically calling out those 3 items, teachers, interventionists, or nurses, interventionists, and counselors in this item, is because those were items that were listed farther up in the priority list. So it's basically pointing out, not to contradict what you're suggesting, but it's pointing out that if the earlier priorities, if priorities 1 through 3 were funded, that would assist with priority 4.
Okay. And then an possible addition on number 5, I think we discussed this at the last meeting, but maybe I remember some of the directors of schools mentioning the fact that although we've received a lot of federal money for technology expenditures, those expenditures are going to result in ongoing future costs for maintenance and upgrades and all of that to the technology. And I didn't know if we'd want to add some kind of sentence to that effect, so that if someone looks at this and thinks, oh, you got all that federal technology money, they would understand why we're asking. It's like that's going to create increased ongoing costs in the future.
Good. That's on 5. Can you scroll down just a little bit? Because I thought we had some language in the letter.
The final sentence does mention maintenance of equipment. We don't currently have anything specifically noting the federal funding.
Okay.
And David's
So,
correct, because I do remember that we talked about that and we wanted to make it clear that what we're talking about has nothing to do with the federal money. And so clarification may be in order. I thought that we had included something in the letter, but perhaps we did not include it. The letter is included here, and I know we can get to it eventually and see, but you're thinking here, David, that something should be noted. Correct.
That's my thought. I just think some folks initially their knee-jerk reaction is going to be, why are you asking for more technology funding? You just got all those federal dollars. And just maybe some statement even acknowledging that, but recognizing that that will create ongoing costs in the future to maintain all these systems. I can submit some language in the chat if you'd like me to, or we can discuss it however.
That would be helpful, because I know what we're planning to do is have everyone accept all of the recommendations. And if there's anyone is objecting to anything that's said along the way, I think we should know whether we should include that or not. So makes it challenging toward the end unless someone objects along the way. Now, Nathan, tell me if I'm wrong, because if we need to wait and somebody has objection to something that was said earlier through this report review, then we can handle it that way. what's the best way to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think if probably the best way is if someone doesn't like the wording that we come to, I mean, we'll have to put it in right now so that you can see it. And if someone doesn't like the wording that we're coming to on a particular issue, they need to speak up. And I mean, ultimately, we could do a roll call vote on each one. But if everyone's in general agreement, I hate to do a bunch of roll call votes where everybody votes aye on it. Does that make sense? That way we could just roll it into one motion at the end that says move to adopt as edited. And then, you know, then there's just the one vote that's necessary. If that makes sense.
Is there any objection to that? What Nathan just recommended?
Not as that, I do have a question about number 5 or additional comment.
Yes, go ahead, Mayor McDonald.
The, one of the things that I thought we talked about earlier, but I don't see where it made it in, is the fact that teachers for these areas, the amount we need to pay them to get them is almost a different chart, because you're bringing them out of 6-figure businesses to teach people how to do that. And I know we've been really fortunate in Bartlett to hold on to our tech guy, but he's, you know, fortunately he has a passion, and not every city is going to have that, and we won't have it forever. So I really would hope, because we went to so much trouble doing all these different charts for average pays. And okay, I understand that, but we don't talk about how expensive these instructors are, and the fact that they don't fit in the chart anywhere in an amount that we could attract them. Thank you. Did I lose everybody?
I think Ben, well, I think we need to know what others are thinking with regard to your comments. I know it's in general, we've not included that type of information in the past, so I just want to gauge other people's reaction. You know, all this is, of course, a statement of the way things exist today. And based on the consensus of the committee of what our priorities are and language that we had agreed upon before. But I still think we need to hear from others what you think regarding Mayor McDonald's comments.
Well, Madam Chairman.
Yes.
You say we haven't normally talked about in the things that we sent to Nashville, that type of language. My question to that would be, why? Why not? If it takes all of this other to explain why we're looking for higher pay in these other positions, why would we not take a moment to explain the difference in the cost of hiring someone to teach these classes?
Well, there is, of course, language that's based on the averages. And so it would be interesting to know what your thoughts are regarding the language that would be inserted. If you could provide us in the chat box some recommendations on what that language would look like, then the other members could react to inclusion of, or in favor or opposed. And I believe, Ben, do you have something that you're adding? Because I'm trying to keep up with navigation and also read some of the comments that are coming. Do you have something that's in response to what Mayor McDonald is saying? Because I think if we have Mayor McDonald's language, that would help us.
This is actually, my suggestion was on number 4, the second paragraph. I was reading through the second paragraph, and I think everyone on the committee understands the intent of the second paragraph, but I think it may be helpful to add to that second sentence the reason priorities 1 through 3 if funded at a higher ratio, help increase teacher compensation is because all that money is included in the instructional component. Just some clarifying statement that brings it all together for a reader. I felt it was implied, but for some people, if they don't have a very good grasp, if you will, of the BEP or understand the different components, just reading through the recommendations very quickly, that may be lost as to why increasing 1 through 3 helps teachers, teacher salaries. So it was just a suggestion to help clarify that.
And I see that you've included your recommendation, Erica. I believe you picked up on that and you're adding it.
Yes, is that the correct location, Ben?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And,
So-
and I'm certainly open to feedback. It was just intended to clarify.
And David
Hargrove?
provided, yes, and David provided, I just want to recognize that David also provided language for an edit, and Erica, you probably have seen that, and we'll include that. Yes, Dale. Dr. Lynch.
My apologies. I would just share with the group, looking back on all 5 priorities, and something that Ben had just said, and Mayor McDonald. You know, something that Ben had said, that all of these are in the instruction component. It's kind of what I mentioned to Nathan yesterday, is that actually nurses are not.
Right.
And with that, they're in the classroom component. And that just goes to show how confusing some of this can be if we don't have that document right in front of us. And I have to look at it all the time. And so I would say to us, having the BEP Blue Book on those 6 or 7 pages is vital. Because whether it's in the classroom component or the instruction component, as I was digging into this yesterday, it's important for all of us to know, because it's either 70% of an instructional salary position or 75. And when I was looking at our 5 recommendations, and this is no indictment on us, this is not negative toward us, but when I look at all 5 of those recommendations that we're looking at proposing, I'm not real sure if there is a true goal on any of those 5. You know, I think those are recommendations and good recommendations, but when it says at a level closer to school nurses or national best practices, at a level closer, you know, when we want to increase funding for RTI, when we want to increase teacher compensation, as Mayor McDonald mentioned, what's our goal here? I think all those things are very important and warranted, but I'm not even saying we suggest that we change it, but I'm just not real sure as a group that we have said, this is what we want, for instance, on school nurses, and other than getting closer to national best practices. And I did not know this number, and I doubt there's anybody or very many on this call other than probably Mary Ann that knows this. The number of nurses that the state of Tennessee right now funds, that's our number 1 priority, for 1 million students in Tennessee, at 75% is only 358 nurses. I mean, 358 nurses at 75% for 1 million students. So I would just say that we need to think about that in setting these recommendations to get closer to what we really want. And I think Ben is exactly right, and I think Mayor McDonald's right, and I appreciate the work of this committee. I just want to share a little bit of that. So I don't have anything to add, but I certainly have some thoughts that I want to share with you all.
So, Dr. Lynch, you know, I admire you and respect you immensely. And so what I would say to all of the members of the committee, when the letter is produced, it is sent to everyone. We talk about it in the meeting. I would suggest that any recommended changes that you have, if it doesn't get accepted during the meeting when we are talking about the final priorities, then before we submit this final letter, we definitely need to hear your input, because now we're after the fact. The letter has already been submitted, and so we're trying to change the elements of what was in the letter. And that's not necessarily that we shouldn't do that. It's just that if we could take a stance that we're going to do accept all the changes as best we can before we get to this juncture. That would be my recommendation for all of us. And if you're not being heard and you're pushing a suggestion, a recommendation, then we need to do something like this where you're giving that language in the chat box, and then we can insert it into the letter or the report to where everyone can weigh in and say, that's it, I like that. And I think we did a fair amount of that, but not to the degree that now that you've pointed out, Dale, and of course what Mayor McDonald has suggested. I want to see the language that Mayor McDonald is suggesting. It would help us be able to react to it today before this report is completed, because we're coming up on the deadline. It's due November the 1st. So.
Chairman Hartgrove, may I add something to go along with Mayor McDonald's, what he had talked about for teacher compensation? And I mentioned this yesterday, and Mary Ann may be able to help, or Nathan, regarding teacher compensation, and it may just, I may just be reading the report wrong, but on page 12 and page 20, page 12, when I read it, it says, the way that I interpret this, again, this could be wrong, but I shared this yesterday with Nathan, so maybe he can help me, or Mary Ann. It looks like this report on page 12 says that we are at a certain place with our average teacher salary in Tennessee, which I think when you look at this, it says we're slightly, I believe this is the one that says we're slightly above, but on page 20, it says we're not above the Southeast average. Am I looking at that wrong? Or because I think they contradict what they're saying there, or what we're saying on page 12 and page 20.
Nathan, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say, happy to deal with that. We actually sent you the answer on all that yesterday afternoon. So it's in your inbox. But Erica can walk us through. Basically, one is an estimate, and one reflects the actual total numbers from TDOE as they were done at different times. That's explained apparently in the footnote, but you and I, in our conversation yesterday, I had missed that. And so, but yeah, Erica, if you'll walk us through that.
Okay, so on page 12, the Tennessee actual average licensed salary that is listed on page 12 is based on real complete data from the Tennessee Department of Education. We can be quite confident that this is as accurate of data as we can get for the state of Tennessee. The information that is listed on page 20 is from a different source. This is estimates of instructional salaries from the National Education Association. This information is not as exactly precise as the information from the Tennessee Department of Education. So in this case, the NEA estimate of average instructional salary in Tennessee is a few $100s less than what the Tennessee Department of Education has reported. We can be confident that the Tennessee Department of Education's number is more accurate for Tennessee, but we use this National Education Association data to make an estimate of the regional average because they publish state by state estimates annually. It's really difficult to get consistent estimates across states, and this is just one organization that consistently every year puts out estimates for every state. So that's why we are using that data here. In terms of comparing our number to the Southeast average, we can be more confident in the precision of the Tennessee data than we can in the Southeast average, which is based on a regression analysis that could be off by a few $100s in either direction. Does that make sense?
I certainly understand what you were saying, Erica. It just, to the reader that looks on page 12 and the reader that looks on page 20, I think it would confuse them. If we are, if we feel like that the data on page 12 is accurate, but we're not quite sure if the data is accurate on page 20, I just call that to everyone's attention.
This is Mary Ann. If I might insert a comment in support of what Erica is saying, we just yesterday received the questionnaire from NEA that provided this estimate of the 2021 salary. And what they're asking for now is our actual average for 2021, which they will then use to estimate 21-22. And so this does lag almost a year behind the department data. So that, you know, this is an estimate, and it's an estimate on the part of NEA, not on the part of anyone else. And I agree, it could be confusing. I will again reiterate and support what Erica said. The data that we provided back on page 12 is actual data that we receive from the districts and that we use to calculate the actual average salary for that fiscal year. But just confirming that the NEA data does lag a full year.
We do currently have a footnote on this page explaining that the NEA data is an estimate based on regression analysis and may not be exactly the same as the actual state data. If you think it would be better to move that information up on into the actual body text on this page rather than having it as a footnote, I could do that to make it more apparent.
And I have one other question, which might be for Mary Ann. The chart on page 12 is labeled as licensed salaries. So I always understood that to include all licensed staff, which would include superintendents. And the page 20 chart is instructional staff, which would not include some of those maybe higher level admin people that have licenses. Is that an issue also? You are correct that the licensed personnel does include all personnel that hold a license. So that is the average of anyone, including supervisors and administrators. I am not sure, and I would have to check to see exactly what population the NEA data is based on.
Erica, this is Bob. Just like you have on that chart on page 12, it says NEA regional estimate, and it has Tennessee actual license. On that chart down on page 20 or 21, whatever it was, you just had estimated. I would put NEA or estimated by NEA. That way it'd be clear in the write-up that that's separate. And then, as you were suggesting, move that footnote up into the body. I think that would help.
So you wanted to have estimated by NEA here in the header of the table?
Yep. That ties it back, I think.
Okay, and then I can move this text up.
The other thing too, Erica, I want to make sure, because we are getting a lot of comments in the chat box, and I think many very valid comments that need to be discussed. And Kurt, the comment that you made, Kurt Rombarger, that is included in, I think it's the last line of that particular section. You mentioned the ratio of students to counselors, 1 to 250. We do actually have that listed on the last line. Cliff is mentioning that Melissa Brown pointed out, and that's correct. It should probably read a lower ratio rather than the higher ratio if the intent is to generate more money, and that's in paragraph item 4. So I think we need to catch those and make those notations that Cliff has mentioned. Sarah had provided language for a recommendation she had, so I want to make sure, Erica, that I don't need to worry about this, because I know we want to continue the conversation. But once you put in, and if you have time to put all this in before we go to the final vote, then we can come back and briefly review and make sure no one has any objection, if we can do that, because I don't know that everybody's picking up on all the items that are in the chat box. I don't want to make this laborious, but I want to make sure we can get through this in a more streamlined fashion, but not neglect to pick up something on the far right.
Well, I can continue to put the items from the chat into the body of the document in this red text, so that perhaps at the end we could go back through and look at all the red text and make sure that we've not missed anything.
Thank you. And Erica, I know we wanted to turn it back to you to go through this, continue on. But I do want to make sure somehow, some way we get Mayor McDonald's recommended language, or if somebody else can type it in for him. I'm not sure exactly how you want to do that, Mayor McDonald, but we don't want to miss including your language and having it reviewed and approved by everyone. Okay.
Madam Chairman, I appreciate that. I'm a really slow typer. I'm working on it,
Okay.
but I have a lot of staff normally, and I don't have them with me today. So I'm pecking away.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate knowing the status. Okay, moving back to you, Erica.
And also regarding the comment about the recommended nurse ratio, we do have that in our paragraph about nurses as well. So although we don't have in the headline, it does just say closer to national best practices. Farther down in the paragraph, it does specifically say if we went to the nationally recommended ratio of 1 to 750 with a minimum of 1 per district, then the ratio would increase the expenditures by $42,981,000 and add 948.4 nursing positions. So that does give a specific number of how many people, how many additional positions we're talking about here. Okay. Yes, and back to in number 4, I see that Ben has updated his recommendation based on Dale Lynch's point about nurses being in the classroom component of the BEP. So I will put that in as well.
Yeah, and to Dale's point, he was correct on that. So just wanted to make sure that we're clear and add that in. So thank you.
So on the technology piece, so we're wanting to add an additional chart based on average pay for people in the tech industry.
Yes, because that's where we're having to get them from.
And for all, I mean, the other hard to staff areas as well. I mean, it's one of the reasons, I guess, that we have laws on the books and the ability for local districts to create differentiated pay plans so that they can pay the individuals who are in the hardest to staff areas more money. It's about, I always say as a history major, there's 10 of me to every one chemistry major, right? And so the districts have the ability under law and state board rule and policy to compensate those positions more than
I understand that, but what happens is the chart that we have is about 50% of what some districts would have to pay. Not 70, not 75, but like a lot of other areas, it's about 50% of what it actually takes to have a person with that knowledge stay with you, come to you and stay with you.
Same thing with a chemist or an engineer.
Yeah.
Charlie Hargrove. I was going to address number 5. I was thinking that number 5 was more about the that pot of money that's divided up by students, and so it's based on the number of students that we have. Typically, I know in my district we use that funding, to purchase computers and so on and so forth, and we don't use that funding to pay for the salaries of our instructional or our technology people. So I don't know if that's kind of what Mayor McDonald's talking about, is that's that may be something different that may need to be addressed, but I was thinking that this was just focused on that amount that we get per student.
Madam Chair,
It's Nathan.
what Superintendent Pruitt, I think makes a pretty strong point there. I mean, what if there was just a statement at the end of number 4 to recognize that certain hard to staff positions, require a greater salary to attract and retain people with, specialized backgrounds, because exactly the same thing can be said about chemistry teachers, and exactly the same thing can be said in many cases about your advanced math teachers as well. And so maybe since number 4 is dealing more with the instructional component, there could be some statement in there about hard to staff positions. And I'm just spitballing here to see how it strikes folks.
Well, I would say that I understand what Mr. Pruitt's talking about as far as, is this just computer equipment and things like that? But to me, it's more, and maybe I'm thinking differently than everybody else. But I think it's not the problem. I'll give you an example that we're facing in West Tennessee. We get this wonderful Ford plant, 6,000 jobs, and what's going to happen potentially is if the pay is high enough, the people will leave the medical device industry to go operate the machinery at the Ford plant, and we will have a void in the medical device industry. So it's great that we're putting these wonderful jobs across the state, but how are we, and as an extension, are a part of the thought process for funding education, are we looking at these real-time needs in communities in terms of education? We did a pilot where we put the TCAT basically in our high school, and so you get dual credit for that. I don't know how many other people do that, but it has been absolutely wonderful. But it's an example, and it's needed across the state. It's an example of how we meet real-time jobs, how we educate our children to meet real-time jobs. Thank you.
One thing that I do want to mention, and other members, you can certainly jump in. When we voted on our top priorities in the last several years, technology was considered to be the devices. So this particular one, from my understanding, from everything, all of our discussions, this was not meant to include the resources, the human resources that are associated with that. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't have that lens and consideration in the next round of establishment of our priorities next year. But it was my understanding, and somebody please correct me, that this was not to include manpower, human capital. And so we could certainly add that in the future year, but please, if somebody views this differently besides Mayor McDonald, please let me know.
Madam Chairman, it's Kirk Drumbarger. I agree with everything that's been saying here, and I agree with Mayor McDonald that there are these hard to staff positions, and they don't equate to the private sector jobs. But we to Superintendent Pruitt's point, we see this across the board. For example, I have an electrician on our staff that's about to retire. I'm not going to be able to hire a licensed electrician. We just get him because he loves to work in the school system and he's near retirement age and it works for him. But we're not going to be able to replace him with a full-time electrician. We can't match that salary. And so, to Nathan's point as well, we see that in math teachers and chemistry teachers, education. Well, we see it in superintendents. Education just doesn't pay right now what the private sector does, and that's always going to be a challenge. To Mayor McDonald's point, I don't think it would be unfruitful for us to include a line speaking of that, speaking toward that, this is a profession that traditionally does not underpays or undervalues the value, the going rate for those employees. I don't know how we word that, but I just think to focus in on technology would be a little misguided, because it is across the board, from teachers to faculty and staff to administrative positions. It's just it's the nature of this industry, and but I don't think we'd be incorrect in including a line that's stating something to that effect. Thank you.
Do you want to submit something in the chat box with regard to your recommendation so others can weigh in? And they can certainly weigh in now. We don't have to wait for your specific language. Other comments regarding the recommendation?
This is Bob. Evie, I would support what's being said right now, particularly with regard to the staffing. If we remember, we did this evaluation back in May or some February, March. When did we do this ranking, Nathan?
So everybody took a survey, and then we had our last meeting was in August, actually, where we went piece by piece through and put all the language together.
Yeah, but since that ranking, I mean, things have changed with regard to the supply and demand, particularly people, and with regard to a lot of these technology positions. And I think it's only gotten worse. And so having a statement in there, like Kurt was suggesting, I think would be very appropriate to show that that is a challenge that we're facing now, going to be facing in the future. And this is an area that we have needs for.
Chairman Hargrove.
Yes,
This is Dale. I have a quick question for Mary Ann. And Nathan just reminded me of something that when we addressed this in August, a lot of our schools weren't even in yet or close to it. Mary Ann, what's our student enrollment count right now this year, based on where we were, not last year, because we're very thankful for the hold harmless year, but the year before that, like 18, 19. What's our enrollment statewide now? What's it looking like versus where we were a couple of years ago, so that we know what that's going to look like in funding for next year?
I do not have a comparison with 2 years ago. What we have been looking at is where we were last year at this time. And all that we have really from the districts is month one, which is typically not extremely accurate, because that is, the first month of school. There's a lot of transitions, a lot of movement with students. Month one was slightly down actually from month one of last year, a year ago this time. And so we're looking to month two in the near future to see if that is rebounding at all. I am certainly happy to go in and look and see where we were 2 years ago at this time and give you an update. I can try and do that while we're meeting if you'd like.
Well, make sure I'm accurate here, Mary Ann, because I could be wrong. But what we're looking at for next year and next year's funding, right, will be based on the kids that we're serving this year, but we were in a hold harmless year this year. So that's why it would be important to look at 18, 19. Is that not right?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. And
for funding purposes.
For funding purposes, yes. And so if we have districts across Tennessee that all of a sudden we get this allocation and it's a lot less than it is, I'm sure that the superintendents on the phone will be calling quite quickly to Toss and to others. So that's why I was just wondering, I think it would be good, not that we change anything in this report. That's not what I mean, but just for, again, that's another one of those things for informational purposes. And I apologize, Chairman Hartgrove, but I think that's important.
No need to apologize at all. And Dale, you made a comment in the chat box about we haven't spoken about the inflationary cost on technology. That language is included on line 3 of number 5.
Yes, it currently says
Thank you.
You're
that we
welcome.
are recommending addition, or the committee is recommending addition of an inflationary component.
Perfect. I apologize. I see it now. Thank you.
Madam Chair, one thing to a comment that Mayor McDonald made earlier is, you know, on you were talking about the co-location of the TCATs and other post-secondary opportunities. I'll tell you that the report that's going to come out from the Educational Recovery Innovation Commission makes a series of recommendations exactly along the line of what you were talking about there. As far as that goes, so I think you know, I think that is something that will certainly be getting more attention as time moves forward. Just as an FYI.
Also, Erica, you may have seen it. There is language in the chat box from Mayor McDonald. And Robin Fairclough has said that she agrees with the discussion. It's more about whether we should add tech support positions or higher funding for them in the future. Item 5 was about devices and access, for what it's worth. And I appreciate that comment. Back to you, Erica.
So on Kurt's suggestion, if I think if we don't come to a consensus on it, we'll get to the end and not really know where we want to go. Can we scroll up in the chat? First of all, I didn't quite. Is everyone okay? First of all, with Sarah Morrison's suggested language in priority 3?
This was regarding the RTI squared ratio.
Right. Because if so, then that puts that to bed. And we fixed Cliff's point about ratio, lower ratio rather than higher ratio. I think, yes, that's fixed. And so coming down to Kurt's language there.
Would this language from Kurt Dronebarger, would this go in number 4? Because it is applying to teachers and staff in a variety of positions, math, science, etc., and technology.
Yes, and I mean that doesn't have to be included, but I took from Madam Chairwoman that we wanted some language there speaking about the different job descriptions that, that would be included there. So, if the committee thinks something needs to be added there, and certainly someone more eloquent than me can change that around. But I was just making the note that we're acknowledging that there are many different aspects or many different job descriptions that would fit into this category that would be affected by this type of funding. So it doesn't have to be added, but just speaking to Mayor McDonald's issue and then the issue that Superintendent Pruitt brought up as well.
Kurt, would you just read that for everyone in case they're not looking at the chat box? Would you read that into the record and then get everyone's reaction, and then Erica can then include it if that is the will of the group?
Okay, I just said that speaking to the complexity of all these different positions, I said that public education traditionally offers employee salaries that pale in comparison to those of similar jobs in the private sector. Although the BEP Review Committee recognizes that the BEP may not be able to meet these thresholds, the committee does suggest the need to be more competitive in these markets in order to recruit and retain the best available employees.
Feedback from others? If there are no objections, the language will be added. If I do not hear any objections, we're adding it.
Really, Hargrove, you may be able to, if you're wanting to add it, there's a statement in number 4 about increased local flexibility. You may be able to tie that in to that part where those increased funds would give local flexibility to allow that to occur.
Okay, that's a suggestion. Does that seem reasonable to everyone? Hearing no objection. That's where,
Okay.
nice. Erica, did you catch that?
Yes, so does that mean you would like me to insert Kurt Jonenbarger's language directly after the sentence that currently mentions local fiscal flexibility?
I don't think you could put it in that sentence. That would be a very long sentence.
Yes, so it would be here.
Everyone see that? So
I would say, and again, I operate outside of the academia, so if I don't get it academia correct, I apologize. I'm just a real practical, pragmatic kind of a guy that's been doing what I do for about 20 years. And when, for me, when we just throw it out as employees, if we're trying to, of course, what we're doing may not exist in 5 years if the governor has his way, but at least while we're doing this, we have to look at these hard to fill positions. And I think we have to call that out. And this almost does that, but it doesn't quite get there to me.
Mayor
We
McDonald,
welcome-
could we put in a couple of IEs, with, technology coordinator or director, high school math teacher, chemistry teacher, just a few examples in parentheses to notate that?
There's trouble with some of that, and I'm not saying don't do it. It's just remember, I mean, you've got our special education folks that work their fingers to the bone. You can't.
So-
Those folks are very hard to keep staff. Hard sciences and engineering is
Dr. Lynch, do you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we started taking the position. We started taking a survey with superintendents a few years ago. That's now become law about the positions that are vacant and what's the positions that are hard to fill in White County could be very different than Gibson Special or in East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, or West Tennessee. So the flexibility of our current school funding formula is the best for local districts. Yeah, I just would tell you that the funding is what needs to be improved. I think we all know that, but that flexibility is critical in allowing districts to be able to have more nurses or more special ed teachers or more instructional folks in the areas that they need in their own local community. But I think Mayor McDonald points out a great problem in his area, but that problem may not exist in an East Tennessee area or whatever. So that flexibility is just so vital. We just need to increase funding for our school public funding formula. I mean, I think flexibility and recognizing those hard to staff positions are critical. And I think you all have done a very good job of that.
Instead of saying, let's see, Dale, can you mute yours, please?
Bob, are you trying to speak? Go ahead.
Yes. Instead of saying recruit and retain the best available employees, how about to recruit and retain the critical positions? And, we're not just talking to say about technology. It goes back to the differentiated pay. It just supports the need for differentiated pay. And we recognize that that's important to get the additional funds to provide that differentiated pay. And whatever the positions are with regard to the individual districts, they can meet those.
Feedback from what Mr. Eby just said? So it's the second to last line you were suggesting modifying that language.
Yeah, just change in order to recruit and retain the best available employees. Just change that to in order to recruit and retain these critical positions or the critical positions.
Is that satisfactory, especially to our superintendents on the call and those who are in school systems? Not to leave anyone out? Is that acceptable?
Works for me.
Someone's trying to speak?
Get your lip out. This is Eddie Pruitt, Gibson County. I'm good with that change.
Okay.
I see
Without-
Robin Fairclough in the comments has suggested critical or hard to staff positions.
Fine by me.
Superintendents, others? Critical or hard to staff positions. Are you good with that? Without objection, we're accepting that. Okay, moving on. Erica, back to you.
Okay,
How many more
so
pages we have to go through?
yes.
I'll make sure
All
we get-
right, so moving on to the next page, 2021 BEP Review Committee Notable Action Items. This language is very similar to what we have every year. It just notes that this committee is required to meet 4 times a year. We've had 3 of our meetings already, and the 4th will take place later in the year to make plans for the upcoming year. This page notes that we had a meeting to adopt the priority list, and that we also are having a meeting right now to review the draft of this 2021 annual report. And at the end of this meeting, once all of the changes have been approved, I will go through and finalize them, and then the state board staff will prepare transmit this amended version by the statutory deadline of November 1st. Moving on to a BEP salary equity analysis, we already had a little bit of discussion about this. So this page shows a comparison between the NEA regional estimate and the Tennessee actual average licensed salary, including the percentage gap. We already discussed the slightly different data sources that are used for each of these, and hopefully we have managed to clarify that a bit more. On the next page, it discusses, the paragraphs here discuss the methodology for calculating weighted average salary. That has been the same now for several years, so that's not new this year. We have here a chart showing the changes over time to weighted average salary. As you can see, there was a small decline in weighted average salary compared to the previous year. And I believe Marianne Dursky has a brief explanation of why we saw this small decline.
Yes, thank you. We noted a decrease in the number of teachers at the higher number of years of service in many of our districts. That combined with the fact that there was no increase to the BEP salary component for FY21 that would have in other years perhaps offset the decrease in the higher paid teachers. And so those two factors combined, the lower number of teachers with higher years of experience and the lack of a salary component increase led to a small decline in the weighted average salary for 2021.
Thank you. The next table, table 3, shows a comparison of weighted average salary and actual average licensed salary, lowest in the state versus highest, and also notes the number of systems below average and the number of systems above average. The paragraph below discusses the change over time in the maximum versus minimum salary, which is also presented in table 4. So you can see here that the maximum versus minimum salary disparity is down slightly from the previous year, and the coefficient of variation, which is a measurement of how closely salaries are clustered around the average, is also down slightly, which means that compared to last year, salaries are slightly less disparate across districts. We also have the coefficient of variation shown here in a line chart. As you can see, it's been relatively stable the last 4 years, only small changes, and it's had a general downward trend since 2015. In the review of the BEP salary component funding gap, we have a chart that shows the difference between the BEP instructional salary component and compares that to the weighted average salary and the actual average licensed salary. And the percent gap shown there is the difference between the actual average licensed salary paid by LEAs and the BEP instructional salary component. So you can see that that is currently at 15.7%.
Erica, I had a little difficulty on that one, on the percent gap, I had to do the calculation to figure out percent gap between what. So you might want to add an explanation in the header of the column that's percent gap between those two.
And Eric, I see that we have a comment from Ben on page 13. Would it be helpful to include a footnote on why the decrease occurred in that table on page 13? I certainly could put that in if the committee thinks that would be helpful.
Madam Chair, and when I read that, I kind of wondered the same thing, and Mary Ann's explanation was exactly what it was. Really, really helpful. So I just thought for the average reader looking at this report, it may be helpful to do the same thing, but it's up. Certainly just a suggestion up to the committee.
Okay, so we have a suggestion from Ben. Is there any objection?
May I ask Mary Ann to share that one more time?
Certainly, there were two factors that contributed to the decrease. The first was that we noticed a lower number of teachers at the higher number of years of service, which typically carry a higher salary for those individuals. So we had more people, in other words, at lower salaries than in the previous year. Secondly, there was no increase to the BEP instructional component for fiscal year 21. Typically, that increase in the salary component, which is then passed along to teachers and others in the form of salary increases, could serve to offset the decrease that it results from a lower number of teachers at the higher salary levels, or offsets the number of teachers who retire at those higher salary levels. But the lack of a salary component increase combined with a lower number of teachers at higher salary levels resulted in a lower weighted average overall for the state.
And I think to clarify, not necessarily clarifying, but the important point here was, to me, the first point that Mary Ann made, where we saw a lower number of teachers at the higher salary level. To me, that means, and it's not necessarily the purview of the committee, but to me, that means our more experienced teachers that have been in the profession for a long time are leaving the profession. So while it's not necessarily the purview of the committee, it is an example of those that we need to keep deciding to leave. the ones with the most experience.
I think that is very insightful from Ben, and I think it's outstanding explanation from Mary Ann. It goes back to what Mayor McDonald talked about earlier about hard to staff positions in his area or in other places. We need to look at how we're funding education. And again, I'll go back to what Ben said. It may not be for the purview of this committee, but that page speaks volumes. And so thank you for pointing that out, Ben, and also Mary Ann. Thank you.
I'll give a shout out to TSBA. I just got my TSBA journal this past weekend, and in that journal, there is a table that states the number of teachers that are eligible for retirement this year going up through 2025. And it's pretty amazing. So.
Well, thank you. And we certainly couldn't have put that together without help from TCRS and the treasurer's office. They were very helpful with getting that data. And I think it's just an important thing for districts to look at when they're putting their strategic plan together and projecting how they're going to employ people in the future. And a lot of it comes back to funding and what are the resources available to allocate to those positions.
Ben, thank you for that recommendation. I know that when I do this periodically every year, go back to the reports, and you can look at a report, and if you do not have the explanation, then you find yourself saying, what happened then? And so having that footnote, that explanation, I think is very beneficial. And of course, I try to hold my opinions because I don't want to influence anyone else, but thank you. Extreme compliments to you for adding that suggestion. Is there anybody who would object to that after I said that? You made a great suggestion. Thank you, Ben. Moving on back to you, Erica. I know you've been typing that notation. Doing a great job, Erica. Thank you. With language in the chat box from Mary Ann.
You need to add in what Mary Ann suggested, coupled with no increase in the BEP component for that. It's there. I'm sorry. I missed it.
Erica, you are handling this exceedingly well. I don't think I could do what you're doing. So thank you for making the changes as well as guiding us through the report. So thank you for that. And whenever you're ready, you can continue. And Mary Ann says your language is perfect. Is everyone else hearing Erica?
Oh, sorry about that.
I was not sure you were speaking until I scrolled over to visually see you. So
my apologies for that. I forgot that I was muted. So we're going on to review of regional in-state salary disparity. This chart shows the increase or decrease in salary disparity within various regions in the state in the past year. And then in the far right column, it shows the general trend of increase or decrease in disparity over the past 17 years, going back to fiscal year 2004. This chart here doesn't show which systems in particular had increases or decreases, but that detail is included farther down. Table 7 is just a summary of that information. We already briefly discussed the review of teacher salaries for the US Southeastern region, and we made a couple of edits to this page. The text at the top does note that there is, because each state has its own system of accounting and reporting for teacher salaries, it is difficult to get an exactly comparable number across states. So we use this data from the National Education Association because it is reported consistently on an annual basis. All right, we've made it to the appendices, mostly a lot of tables here. So Appendix A is the more detailed version of the salary disparity data by region. It shows within each region a list of the systems in that region and the percentage and dollar amount disparity between the system with the highest pay in that region and the other systems in the region.
Chairman, for Erica's sake, could we take the appendices and the other, the appendix items and just ask if there's any change anyone would like to recommend? Because, you know, we've been pretty laborious in the other things we've discussed, and just an idea.
It's a great idea.
Thank you. Yes, excellent idea. Thank you so much for that.
Okay, does anyone have anything they would in the appendices that they would like to discuss?
Chairman Hartgrove, this is Dale. The only thing that I would call your attention to, but it is very similar to my earlier remarks about the BEP Blue Book, I think it would be information for us to think about down the road. I know we've got this to get published, but I think it would be very, very valuable. For instance, if you look at the appendix for nurses, that is our #1 priority from this committee. And this committee now knows that 358 are funded by the state of Tennessee at 75%. But I think it would also be good to know that that would probably be the highest variance where local school districts in Tennessee actually put their money and fund a lot more positions and even have contracted services. So down the road for us, I think it would be wise for us to look at, this is what the state funds, but here's what the local community says, this is what we need. And you find out what they need by where they put their money. So I just say that to you, that I think that that's something we consider down the road.
That's for the group for sure. Thank you for that recommendation. Others? Hearing no others, I think that takes us through the end of the report, Erica, unless there's something you wanted to point out in the final couple of pages. I know we have the agendas from the previous
Um,
meetings, but I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, the rest of this is just the priority letter and agendas. So I think we've covered everything.
Madam Chairman, this is David Connor. For the sake of discussion, I would move that we adopt this report with the amendments, absent any objections.
Second.
We have a motion and by David Connor, the second provided by, was that you, Mayor McDonald? Did you provide the second?
Yes, I did.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Nathan will call the roll to establish our vote, our final vote of the committee.
Right. Am I to understand it's also a specific authorization to transmit this to everyone that it's required to be transmitted to under the law?
You can add that to my second.
All right,
You can
sounds
add that
good.
to my motion. So.
All right, very good. Michelle Simcox,
Yes.
Chairman White,
Yes.
David Connor,
Yes.
Michael Marin,
Aye.
Ben Torres,
Yes.
Betty Pruitt,
Yes.
Chris Henson,
Aye.
Claire Morrison,
Yes.
Rita Hammock is absent. Mary Andorsky,
Pass.
Greg Turner,
Pass.
Cliff Lippard,
Pass.
Harlan Davis,
Yes.
Bob Eby,
Yes.
Mike Smith,
Yes.
Linda Wesson,
Pass.
Robin Fairclough, Robin,
Yes.
Dale Lynch,
Yes.
Mayor McDonald,
Yes.
Jessica Himes,
Pass.
Kurt Dronebarger,
Yes.
Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Nathan, I could not hear you.
I was calling your name, ma'am.
Yes, and did you call on Frida Hammock because she is present?
Oh, she is. Yeah, I did call on her, but that's all right. Okay, Frida Hammock.
Yes.
Good. Okay. That means you have perfect attendance, Madam Chairman. And with that, you have 17 ayes and you have 4 passes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Excellent. Thank you so much. We had a great discussion to get to this point, and I appreciate all of the recommendations to have our final report completed on time for submission. Nathan, I'm going to turn it back to you. You're going to talk to us about next steps because we have one more meeting that will be upcoming before the year is completed.
Yes, ma'am. So I think as a committee, we're going to have to determine what action or how we want to deal with the TASER memo that was it was put off until the final meeting of this year, last year. And of course, as we've all seen, there are other issues at play with potential changes to school funding. So I think the committee will have to determine, what it wants to do in terms of taking that up, or if it wants to take a wait and see attitude on that. But I would say keep an eye out. We generally tend to aim for the first or second week in December to create a final meeting of the year. And if there are other topics that members want to have added to the agenda, certainly let me know. So with that, I mean, our next step will be get this PDF in the proper form, and I'll send it via electronic mail to the governor, the commissioners, the education committees, et cetera, everyone called for in the statute. That's what's headed next. And I didn't know if anyone else has any comments or things that they may want to offer.
Any other comments from members? Especially based on what Nathan just said.
Madam Chairwoman, this is David Connor.
Yes, David.
With regard to what Nathan referenced as far as the major overall review of education funding in Tennessee, I think Dale and Ben and some others, and certainly a number of directors have been appointed to some of the committees looking at that. But I would be interested as the BEP Review Committee, and I'll just throw this out, see if there's other support for this, that maybe this committee could, through you, send a letter to the administration asking for an opportunity for a briefing and discussion about the possible changes they're looking at going towards. This may be the very last meeting in the BEP Review Committee, at least this year, if the General Assembly decides to go in a whole new direction and completely alter how we fund it. And I think it could be beneficial if we could hear the desires where the administration may be looking at going, and have an opportunity for people who have worked extensively on the current formula to have some feedback.
Thank you for that recommendation. Other thoughts on what Mr. Connor just shared with us? Is it the will of the committee to have a letter submitted from you? It would be coming from the BEP Review Committee. And through my lens, that's the way I see it.
If that is a motion, I certainly would second it. I think if that is a motion to add or to send a letter, I would second that motion.
It wasn't made in the form of a motion, but I'm going to turn it back to you, David Connor, to see if you want to make it in the form of a motion.
I will make it in the form of a motion. I just didn't want to be the only one out there. So no, I mean, seriously, if other members of the committee don't think that would be useful, don't want to go there, but it's certainly something that I would be interested in. So I would make
We
that.
have a motion. We have a motion and we have a second. This does allow everyone else to weigh in and give their feedback. Nathan has his hand raised. What would you like to say, Nathan?
The only thing I'd like to say is please remember, if you're asking the committee to take a step like that, ultimately, and unless you're providing both the wording and the signatures of the members who are in support, you have the potential to put Chairman Hartgrove in a difficult position. Just because she sits as chairman of the State Board of Education, we've always traditionally played a particular role in the BEP. So, and this isn't to say don't do it or vote against it. It is to say that an action like that, I mean, you have to remember that your State Board of Education members are appointed by the governor, and they serve after having been confirmed by the General Assembly. And so if that's something that members would like to do, you all coming up with the language that you want to say and taking that on more would keep the chair out of a potentially sticky situation. And she would never say this, and I'm saying it, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but it's just something that's on my mind. I'm not saying don't do it. I am saying don't just vote to make it happen and then walk away from the process. So it's got to be the members expressing their will as they want to, rather than a letter which looks like it's from Chairman Hartgrove.
Nathan, thank you for that. We do have a motion and a second. Let's hear discussion after we heard the motion and we heard comments from Mr. James. Because what we'll do, hearing no discussion, we'll move into a roll call vote of the members to determine if you want a letter written to the administration. And I would want to make sure you have who wrote down the actual language of the motion? Did Erica catch that, or did you, Nathan? Because-
I would ask for the motion to be repeated before it's voted on, and then I guess we probably need to determine what that language is going to be, or, I mean, because we can't, we can agree to do a thing, but it's, we would have to vote on the language itself. So either that translates to a special called meeting of the BEP Review Committee, or it's something that waits until December for the members to agree on, because anything like that is considered deliberative and it has to be done in public.
This is Sarah. I'm just seeing Ben Torres's comment too, because I think one thing to keep in mind is the timing of all of this. And right now it's just a process for exploring the funding formula. Maybe by December, there'll be a little bit more flesh on the bones, but I mean, are we wanting a briefing of what's going to potentially be proposed in session, or a briefing on the process? And depending on when we ask for the briefing, it may be one or the other. So potentially waiting till December might mean more briefing on the proposal versus the process, but just something to think about as we consider.
And this is Bob Evie. I am a member of the state board along with Shirley Hartgrove. And I guess my question more would be, what is going to happen to this BEP committee down the road? I think the committee has made significant impact. And, you know, I think every year we provide our recommendations, and I think that's important. So to me, the question is how will this committee continue to provide the opportunity to provide impact for funding 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road? That's the question I would have.
The other thing too, Nathan, you had mentioned that if it is the will of the committee to have something submitted now, as opposed to with Sarah's recommendation, take a wait and see approach to hear more about what we learn in December, because there are some of us, I don't know about everyone on the committee, but I know that Vice Chairman Evie of the State Board is on one of the subcommittees. I'm on one of the subcommittees as well. So we'll be engaged in the process. We're not chairing any of those subcommittees, but we will be participating as members. And we have much to learn as well. So I would, you know, Nathan, you mentioned having, if we were to go forward with the suggestion with the motion that is on the table, perhaps having a letter that is signed by all of the members, as opposed to coming strictly from the chairman of the BEP Review Committee and me specifically as chairman of the board. That's also something we need to consider. I'm sorry, I just muted myself. We have a motion and we have a second. What other discussions can be added? Dale, the answer to your question is no.
Okay, thank you. Hey, let me ask, I did not know that. Let me ask David Connor something regarding his amendment, just what he thought about waiting till December. Just a
Fair question.
I'm open to that. I guess my thought, and I may be the only one who feels this way, is that if we've sent in this BEP Review Committee report this year, this entire new process is starting to completely reconsider how education is funded in Tennessee. If the General Assembly comes in next year and makes dramatic changes, this committee may never meet again. I mean, I know we have a meeting planned in December, but it sort of feels like if we wanted to have a statement or have any input into the process going forward, this is kind of our last chance. But I may be the only one feeling that way. Like I said, I know you, Dale, and Ben are serving, and as well as the chair lady and others on here are serving on some of those subcommittees. So maybe as a committee, we're not the appropriate ones to be involved in it. Should go through the subcommittee process that's been established. But that was what I was thinking. I'm happy to withdraw the motion if there's not support within the overall BEP Review Committee, and maybe this is not the appropriate venue to make that request.
I don't know that anybody is saying that you made a motion, you do not have to withdraw it unless you want to. That is your decision. We already had a second, and if those two want to be withdrawn, that is at your discretion, because we'll continue the discussion, and if we do not have discussion, we will move into a vote. Then we will hear the will of the committee. So it's your decision.
For now, I'll leave the motion out there as it's been seconded. But like I said, certainly open to withdraw it if there's not support of the committee.
Thank you.
As far as discussion goes, my question would be, looking at the wording of a letter before signing it and seeing what we're looking at. And I think to Bob's point, what's the role of the committee moving forward? Is there a role trying to find some of that information out? Because a lot of good things have happened over the last 6, 7, 8 years. So that was the basis of my suggestion of just having some actual wording to look at for the committee as a whole together as a group. And I think we did a good job on the BEP review committee report today, all of us together putting, combining our thoughts. So just having that opportunity to do so. That was my thought with the comment.
Thank you for that, Ben. You're absolutely right. This group is working very, very hard, diligently, and I think we should be very proud of the success and the results that this committee has had over the years, even prior to me joining this committee, because I think the process that's in place is very inclusive and it provides everybody an opportunity to weigh in and do what's best for education funding in Tennessee. Other comments, other feedback, please.
This is Kurt Drumbarger. I'm in favor of waiting and seeing where the committees take us over the next several weeks. And I know we do have another meeting coming up in December, and I think that will still give us time to draft something at that point, maybe with a little more guidance at that point. But to David's point, I think that it's a good idea because we don't know what's going to become of the committee. But I'm in favor of waiting till that, at least till that December meeting, of making that decision.
Thank you for that input. Others?
What I might suggest, Madam Chairman, is that members who, are in favor of that would submit proposed language in advance so that it could be circulated and discussion could be had on that. That keeps your, some of us that are obviously in a very awkward position from adding in any editorialization there. That's something to keep in mind, because the question was asked, what becomes of the committee if there is no BEP? For example, there is no BEP review committee. If the statute that authorizes it is repealed or changed in the course of creating a new funding formula, it doesn't exist anymore. It is a function of the law. I think a lot of people on this call recognize that. So just even if the decision is to put it off until December, bringing some proposed language would be very, very helpful.
With that being said, Nathan, I'm thinking if David would want to modify his motion to suggest that we do that in December, not take action definitively today, but to during the December timeframe, take up the letter, suggest that the letter is written based on what we learn between now and December. I'm not sure I'm getting it cogently forming in my mind what that would look like, but we could certainly have you withdraw that motion if with Dale being in agreement, or modifying it so that we're voting on something today that says, let's take it up at the December meeting. And does that even make sense from your parliamentary perspective, Nathan?
So I guess there are two separate questions here. First of all, are we going to have an item on the agenda in December? Or secondly, what you could do as chairman of the BEP review committee is appoint 1 or 2 or 3 members. Actually, probably 1, because I guess if it's a subcommittee of this committee, and this committee makes recommendations to the board and the General Assembly, then it's subject to all of the sunshine stuff, right? So you could ask individuals to submit proposed language, but my only concern is that if that part doesn't happen, then we get to December and we don't have any proposed language, right? So if I would say that the proponents, the folks who want to do that, if they could volunteer at the end of this meeting to say, yes, I'll get a proposed letter, I'll get a proposed letter, and we could have a couple of things to work on, that would be good. But the adoption of that letter would have to be in a public process.
Oh, of course. So then if one member wanted to draft a recommendation, a letter that is recommended, they could submit it to you, and then for the meeting, either you work closely with that individual, and for the meeting in December, then everyone will have an opportunity to review it, make recommended edits. Is that what I'm understanding would be a logical process?
I certainly can. I mean, obviously I work at your pleasure, so that's fine if you'd like to do that, or if there are more than one, I'd like to have kind of the raw copies of whatever individuals want to say, and we can throw that in there.
Well, several people could certainly send recommendations to you, but we definitely want to know that at least one person will send recommended language, that's agreeable to everyone.
Madam Chair, if Dale agrees, I'll withdraw my motion then, and then just, I would be happy to submit some language for a letter to be considered at the December meeting, and I would just then make a request that that item be placed on the agenda for December.
Thank you. Dale, do you have any objection to withdrawing the motion?
Absolutely not.
Very good. So the motion has been pulled and we will not have a vote. We'll have David Connor working on the language for the letter that will be submitted to Nathan that we will take up in our next meeting. Are there any other comments, suggestions before we move into closing, adjourning?
All I'd want to say is, again, a big thank you to Erica, and a thank you to Marianne Dursky. Gosh, having gone through this a lot of years now, I think this has been as smooth as they get, and I'm deeply appreciative.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Nathan. I certainly wanted to add that in my closing remarks. We couldn't have done this today without Erica Light and Marianne Dursky, and certainly others behind the scene. We have Elizabeth Tullis, who makes sure that we're still on the air, live streaming, and can communicate with one another. So thanks so much for her too. Without your
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes.
This
Yes,
is
Marianne.
Marianne.
Yes,
If I might, I would like to call out specifically on my team, Brad Davis, who has contributed to this in the past. Brad was an integral part in the salary disparity study this year, and I do want to give him recognition for his hard work.
Thank you, Mary. And I appreciate you saying that. I know we recognized him last month, but, or I should say the last meeting, but thank you for making those comments. He certainly has made a major contribution to the body of work here. Other comments from anyone else? Of course, we could never do this without Nathan, and everyone's contributions today, I think, have allowed us to come to an excellent conclusion and a great report that will be submitted. Thank you all so much, and without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all.